Ludwig, the Ludwig Drum Company, and the why is because they said so. Questions? Okay. Basically, the history of American drum making was one of my sabbatical projects, and one of the 4 that I didn't complete. But I got started on the Ludwig Drum Company, and this is coming from a very personal place for me. I don't know that I have anything profound to say, but I just found some really interesting stuff, and I decided to use this forum to kind of share my deep love of drums and drumming with you. So, I've almost had a lifetime of drumming. We'll get to that in a few minutes, but I wanted to start out with this. This is an ad for a video that came out in 2009, 100 years, okay, celebration. And almost immediately I ran across something kind of peculiar. A century of the most famous name on drums. A century of the most famous name in drums. And if you're a researcher, you find that you're a little bit OCD and stuff like that bothers you. So because is it in drums or on drums? Which is it? Because if you notice here, it's actually both ways on the same ad. And I thought, well, that's really weird. And so it started bothering me. And I thought, well, the question to ask, my very second response was WWHD. What would a historian do? My first response actually was WTF. Okay. So, for those of you that know that, okay. So, you go to a primary source. Aha! The most famous name on drums. This actually comes from the Ludwig Drummer magazine that I actually had at home because I got this issue in 1965, just like I said. And I knew I had seen that somewhere. I just, that's why it didn't sound right when I gave Bill the title, In Drums, And anyway, it turns out this turns out to be more important than you would think, and that's my little note to the students, that it's okay to get sidetracked, because you never know what's going to be important or not. You might as well just kind of follow that line of thought for a while. Anyway, this is a magazine that they put out in the 60s. They still do, I think, but anyway, through the 60s and 70s. The picture, if you want to know, is Ludwig. I forgot a pointer. This is Ludwig Sr., Ludwig Jr., and these are the Paiste brothers, the grandsons of the founders of Paiste Cymbals that Ludwig acquired under its own name. It's pronounced Paiste. It looks like paste, but it's Paiste. So I'm going to share with you why at least I think this is interesting. Maybe there's 2 of us in the room that think this is really interesting, me and Otto. But this is what it kind of led me into. This is kind of what's next. So I'm not going to promise to come to any profound conclusions today. But you find a lot of American histories intersecting just looking at this one case study, if you will. There's a study here of immigrants. The Ludwig brothers were immigrants. I'll get to them in a sec. There's a history of technology and how it both enhances and detracts from a certain situation. Obviously, music and entertainment. There's a whole business history to be written here. History of material culture, which is what I want to kind of conclude with today. Really leading to what I consider, and we tell our students, you're not really doing history unless you come around to the big questions. What does value mean, for example? Is it market value? Is it sentimental value? Who gets to say? What's quality? Who decides what quality is? How is it determined? And then fame is something some of you know I've been studying for quite a long time in terms of especially its self-reflexive properties in American culture. So these are just a few of the things, again, I'm not promising to cover today, but were suggested to me as I looked into this story. But I am a performer, so we're going to talk about me first. Yeah. Thank you, Bill. 1972, senior picture. And I don't know if this is a thing anymore, but everybody in our band, we had a huge music program, and we all had our senior pictures taken with our instruments. And this is this drum right here. I've had it that long. I think of this as 41 years or 41 pounds ago, whichever you prefer. By the time I posed for that picture, at the age of 17, I'd already been playing for 8 years. I'd been teaching for almost 2 years, teaching drumming. I'd been taking, well, I took lessons, through the school district. Shout out to public school music, starting in the 5th grade. And By this time, I was taking 2 drum lessons a week in rudimental drumming and jazz drumming, and I was also taking viola and flute in preparation for being a music major in college. Very short bio from here. I went to, well, by this time I'd played in just about every music group you can think of. Bands, orchestras, pit bands. We had a all-girl jazz combo in high school, and this my senior year. I was fortunate enough to play with my father's dance band, which was the best training I ever had because it taught me to keep a steady beat. That was the #1 cardinal rule because people were dancing and you had to not speed up on them. Or if you did, it was kind of fun, but anyway. Let's see how fast we... right after this summer, I was also extremely fortunate being chosen to go what was then called the Wolf Trap Academy National Youth Orchestra, which was selected from people all over the country. And we spent 2 months in Washington, D.C., living at American University and then playing at Wolf Trap, playing a concert every week. We were basically a professional orchestra in training for professional. And the highlight of that, which is still one of the highlights of my life, was meeting Beverly Sills, whom we accompanied on that. That's her autograph. And this is where being a drummer or percussionist paid off big time, because the whole first half of the concert, we didn't play. The 3 of us that were the percussionists, all girls, by the way, didn't play. It was only the male timpanist that was playing. So we knew Beverly Sills and her mother were off in another part of the green room, and we finally got our courage to go up and knock on her door and, you know, tell her how. And she was just so incredibly nice, really, really nice, and said, "Oh, you want me to sign your programs?" And we said, "Well, yeah." So that was really special. Short version of the rest is I went to college to be a band director. I got interested in history. I ended up doing both. I went to grad school still not knowing really what I was doing, especially since I entered a musicology program. I got an MA in musicology, but then wandered over to the history department in the meantime, and both departments were very, very kind to me in terms of letting me do a double degree, essentially. I continued to play. I studied composition with some really weird people. I took percussion lessons with the principal of the St. Louis Symphony, meanwhile doing my history studies. So fast forward 30 years or so, I'm still playing, I'm still teaching, and most recently I started dipping my toe about 5 years ago into repairing and restoring drums. And that's where I think I enhanced my appreciation for Ludwig drums. And so again, this is kind of a personal journey. I hope Ludwig will pay me at the end for my ad here. I don't know that they're very best, but there was a reputation of quality that was established early on. But I learned a lot about the Ludwigs. So in 1909, Ludwig Drum Company is Ludwig and Ludwig is founded by the Ludwig brothers, William F. and Theobald. And by the way, all the backgrounds are the various badges that are used, and those are used to date drums and so on. It's part of the collecting mania. Rogers, Gretsch, and Leedy already are in existence, so they're entering a very, very competitive market. And by the way, Otto was kind enough to bring his Leedy, I guess, as comparison, so I can show you how much better Ludwig is. But no, this is a truly great drum. This is a great drum, and it's an antique, and he was very kind to have it up here today. So anyway, they're already going, so they're entering this market, but it's actually as a market as professional drummers. Both William F. and Theobald were, and this was kind of an ad used to establish their credentials. They played in all these, you know, everywhere around Chicago. Again, William was actually born in Germany in 1878. Theobald was born in the United States because by that time the family had immigrated. In 1887 they immigrated. Again, they were not unusual for German immigrants. They were both professionals. And the first thing they do actually is not in drumming. They carve out a niche for themselves in what are called traps, which are the accessories used in drumming, especially used at that time in pit orchestras playing for silent movies. And that was kind of the big market at the time, as well as just kind of shows and, you know, vaudeville shows and things. So this is a patent for the 1909 pedal, which I just happened to have. I have this very pedal. This is, it says on it, and I brought a slide so you didn't have to. This is actually this pedal. You can see the patent 52509. Now, what was the deal with the bass drum pedal? You know, this is pretty, by the way, it still works. It's like a charm. I mean, this is a beautiful pedal. The deal was that you either had to have two drummers in the pit, one playing the bass drum and cymbals and one playing the snare drum, or you had to double drum, as it was called, which was almost impossible, because especially to get the cymbal in there. Or somebody had contrived this wooden pedal that hung down from the top of the bass drum, and but it didn't have a spring, so it kind of went thunk, thunk, thunk. And interestingly, everything I read said that it couldn't keep up with ragtime, and they needed something both to make it possible for one drummer to play the bass drum, cymbal, and snare drum all together, and to keep up with this kind of craze that was going on with ragtime. So they patent this pedal, and basically that's the foundation of the Ludwig and Ludwig drum company. So there's a theme that begins here with technical innovation and how they carve out a niche for themselves. Not so much with drums right away, but with all kinds of other things. William F. Sr., as he comes to be known after his son is born, will design a better timpani pedal. So it wasn't even inventing things, it was really making them work better. In the process, however, he put some drummers out of work, because you no longer, just like technology always does, hint, hint, you no longer need two drummers or more, you just need the one. And this, you know, is the beginning kind of what's called the trap set, okay, the trap set, which originally was drums. So then I kind of had this question in the back of my mind about how these German immigrants fared through the world wars, and it turned out to be kind of a non-issue. The way they fared was to make drums for the U.S. Army. So there's a kind of a, you know, there's both an economic and a patriotic thing going on here. I think is very clever. By the way, Bill Jr. is born in 1916. He becomes very important later, taking over the company. So the caption that goes with this picture is the interior view of the Ludwig and Ludwig Company, located in Chicago. During World War I, the company produced thousands of field drums for the U.S. Army. And note the date, 1917-18. There's a kind of a tragic part of the story here. Oh, I forgot that. That was just on eBay last week. I didn't get it. But that's one of these drums. That's one of these very drums. By the way, there's also a big ad for eBay here. There's a lot of eBay stuff. They were asking $100, which is pretty reasonable. Nobody bought it, so it hasn't been relisted yet. I'm watching it. Okay. Anyway, this is Theobald. And poor Theobald was a victim of the 1918 flu epidemic, it turns out. And the way this happened was apparently sometime along in 1918 or towards the end of the war, Gretsch actually got the contract for U.S. Army drums. So Theobald went to Brooklyn, Gretsch's headquarters, to find out what happened here. Excuse me, Brooklyn was Gretsch's headquarters, but the purchasing agent he knew was also in New York. When he got to New York, they told him the purchasing agent from the Army was in the hospital. So Theobald went to see him to find out why they were buying Gretsch drums. And he contracted the flu and he died. So they say in the Ludwig circles that he died in the line of duty, for Ludwig drums at least. Okay, so then we have a kind of a major change. In 1929, the Kahn manufacturing company buys both Leedy and Ludwig. Yeah, they both. So that's a big change in the company. Now, why did Ludwig Sr. now, and Jr.'s very young, why did they sell to Kahn? Well, they made they made one of their first big missteps. They didn't predict well, perhaps. They were already making drums, and some of the finest drums ever made in the 1920s. But they thought the banjo craze was going to continue, so they started making banjos. And this really pissed off Slingerland, who had the whole banjo market. And so Slingerland, in retribution, started making drums. So basically, between the competition, Gretsch opened a field office in Chicago in 1928, so the competition is getting more intense. Talking Pictures came in, and Senior decided that was going to be the ultimate downfall of their company. So he sold it, and then the Depression hit, so he sold it to Con. But he had second thoughts in all this time. And so he and his son decide to found their own drum company. In 1937, they buy a building in Chicago, a larger building than they'd had before. And they decide to found the William F. Ludwig Drum Company. Well, then Con threatens to sue them over their name because Con owns Ludwig and Ludwig. So they come to an agreement to call it the WFL Drum Company. So for these years, you have WFL drums being built in Chicago, and Ludwig and Ludwig, and then later Leedy and Ludwig being made in Indiana, in Elkhart, Indiana. So again, I don't know if you find this interesting, but this is all kind of part of the dating. When you come across a drum, you can, not only was Ludwig nice enough to stamp most of their drums with a date stamp inside, but if you didn't have that, or if it's faded away, you can basically tell from lots of things, the badges, the lugs, the various parts of the drum when it dates from. And that's part of why people do the history. Then I started searching, because if you grew up with Ludwig's, everybody knew the address. It was really weird. Everybody knew the address on North Damon Avenue where Ludwig was, because it was in all their ads. So I Googled 1728 North Damon Avenue to find a picture of the old factory. And I kept getting this picture, too, from realtors in 2013. It's exactly the same building, and it's condos now, and they're for rent. But I just was really struck by being able to find the exact same angle and everything. It's kind of cool. I don't know. That's the kind of things that excite historians. That's okay. Look at this. Okay. Anyway. Okay. So then we have World War II. We're zipping through the 20th century. And yes, once again, Ludwig now pretty much has an exclusive contract with the U.S. Army. The credit on the back of this photo originally read, "Drum Beats for Uncle Sam, Chicago, Illinois." This was clearly put out by the Ludwig Company. William F. Ludwig, 62-year-old owner and founder of the WFL Drum Company of Chicago, whose company is working on a large order for drums placed with it by the U.S. Army, shown testing the tonal quality of one of the completed instruments. This is dated August 17, 1941. So again, there's kind of an interesting theme here, whether it was very consciously, I mean, it's mostly economic, I think, but it was also a great way for a first and second generation immigrant family to become sort of thoroughly acculturated, I guess you would say, or assimilated. And they were very much assimilationists. They were very, very, they weren't just flag-waving patriotic. They really were genuinely, I think, in love with the United States. Okay. So meanwhile, Ludwig and Ludwig is still making drums in Indiana. Oh, by the way, I bought that picture from eBay. I couldn't believe it was there. This is, okay, anyway. I get a lot of my stuff from eBay. Meanwhile, Ludwig and Ludwig, well, all the drum companies, well, everybody, is having their metal curtailed, their use of metal. So all the drum companies pretty much had to come up with a way to make drums without metal. And this led to some more innovation. You notice maybe this is a Ludwig and Ludwig set, and it's called the Victory drums, like everything else in World War II. You have the tacked-on bottom heads, and and the earlier models did not have those. They were actually much fancier, but that saved having a bottom hoop. And then they have wooden lugs, and they had to figure out a way to make a lug. Here's technology and engineering again. To deal with the stress of the tightening the head. And here's one of these drums. A drum exactly like this sold for $700 on eBay last January. So, needless to say, I don't have any of these on my phone. Anyway, okay, let's see, where are we? Okay. So there's some change. In 1954, Con sells Leedy and its dies and patents to Slingerland. And then in 1955, Leedy and Ludwig ends its operations in Indiana, and the Ludwigs buy their name back. So again, anybody in business history, I'm sure, is familiar with these kinds of things. It was also getting kind of interesting to me. I never thought I would be interested, but it became very, very interesting to me, what is owned. I mean, this really gets into the realm of patents and, you know, and intellectual property, basically, because it's their designs and it's their dyes and their, you know, and various things. They're but, you know, owning the name. They buy their name back with all their designs, their patents, and their tooling. And now, and they ran a big ad. They were celebrating, we got our name back. So now it's going to be the Ludwig Drum Company, which is more or less the same thing today. We'll get there too. So they're, you know, they're advertising basically in trade magazines at this point. This is what's going on. Okay. Okay. So we have the Ludwig Drum Company, and so far we have patriotism, we have innovation, we have a family business, and yes, I don't want to leave this out in talking about things like marketing, but they have a real quality product, and I can talk more about that later. And this is not to say, by the way, that Leedy and Gretsch and Slingerland do not have. There was an incredible era, actually, of drum building in the United States. It really became the center of the drum making world for most of the 20th century, and there were incredible drums being made with incredible craftsmanship. So you can kind of, I guess it reveals as much about my value system as anybody say these, but they just sound good. And again, what does that mean? Well, everybody has maybe a little bit different sense of what sounds good. But usually it's, for a snare drum, for example, it's a very crisp, dry sound. Different genres will like different sounds, so drum companies will gear their market, you know, gear their building to jazz or to rock or whatever, which we'll get to too. But they do have, from this point on, that's the Ludwig. Everything gets stretched out when you use it as the background. I couldn't fix that. I don't know how. There's a combination of marketing genius and just plain dumb luck when it comes to the post-1955 story, at least in my opinion. One of the things they were geniuses at was the concept of artist relations. I'm not sure about the other drum companies yet, but Ludwig entered this, you know, created this idea. If not originally, they were the best at it. As far back as the 30s, they had a whole section of their operation, WFL did, devoted to artist relations. So they went around and got, you know, basically endorsements. And it wasn't that hard because most of these guys were already playing Ludwigs, but sometimes they could get them to switch over. For example, there's Buddy Rich, and that's he's playing a WFL set, so that dates it to the 30s or 40s. One thing to notice for future reference here in a few minutes is that he has his initials on the drums, but there's no indication of what kind of drum it is. And Buddy would actually play whose ever drums he would play every brand of drum. Eventually, I think he finally settled on Slingerland. So he was, you know, he was willing to be persuaded by whoever had the best deal, I think. Certainly one of the great drummers. But this is a very early example of the kind of way they use well-known people. This is the guy. It's smaller because the bigger I got. This is an album cover. For a lesser-known fellow, unless you're a percussionist, by the name of Dick Shorey, who, by the way, is still alive. He was the advertising and educational director of Ludwig from 1957 to 71, and probably is the guy mostly responsible for making Ludwig the kind of the household name among drummers that it became. Mostly because he came up with two slogans. He came up with the slogan, "Most famous name on drums." He's the guy that wrote that. And I traced it back at least to 1962, and they started using that. And that's a really fascinating thing to me as a cultural historian, because I don't know that it was until they said so. But it was, you know, I mean, it's interesting. It wasn't about the quality; it was about the fame. It was about being known. And you know, this in the early 60s in post-war America. We associate that with this kind of brand name recognition, even though, by the way, piano manufacturers pretty much invented that concept in the late 19th century. So, again, it came out of the music business. But they really sort of, you know, he was a genius in sort of capitalizing on this idea that you want the drums that are known. And this turns out, again, to be very much in their favor. But again, I would say they were known, they were played by everybody because they really did have something special, I think, in some ways going on with the Ludwigs. He also came up, by the way, with the phrase total percussion. And that was by the late 60s. They were using the phrase total percussion instead of most famous name on drums. And I want to get to that in a few minutes and why that might have been. I love this cover because you can see perhaps that he's sitting, it's a great picture of him sitting on a Ludwig snare drum. And he created something called the Percussion Pops Orchestra. And he himself also was a professional musician. So everybody they had working for them, whether they were marketing or sales or whatever, they were drummers. And they were like totally devoted to this product, you might say. And he was the most important probably employee ever of Ludwig's. Joe Morello may or may not be a name known to people in the room. He certainly was well known at the time. He was Dave Brubeck's drummer and still known as one of the finest drummers. And interestingly, in my research, he seems to pop up the most often, which tells me something about the audience that Ludwig was marketing to. They were marketing to jazz drummers. And they were also trying to sort of capitalize on this market of kind of the newer jazz that Brubeck represented. And they kind of helped Morello, in a way, become a sort of household name. And I'm sorry to say Joe Morello just died a couple of years ago. Now notice he does have the Ludwig logo there, but it's kind of small and, well, anyway, I'll get to that and why that's important. Okay. Just so you know, they don't always use white guys. Oh, this is Morello in the factory. I just thought it was a cool picture because he's testing drums. And they would bring these artists in and they would ask them. They not only gave them drums, of course, but they would get advice, and they would ask, what kind of sound do you want, and how should we design this? And they designed some drums for Buddy Rich, for example. So I just thought that was it was a promo shot, of course, but, associating Morello with the drums again. But it wasn't all, there were, the white drummers got more known among white audiences. But, there were countless amazing African-American drummers, of course, and Ludwig, was very aware of this. So this is just a couple of examples. They used plenty of non-white drummers in their ads. Ed Thigpen, who played with Oscar Peterson, among others. Max Roach, who some jazz histories credit with practically inventing modern jazz. And notice the different logo. This is actually this is late 60s now. And they're using Max Roach, and he's using that. Okay. So the turning point for Ludwig in terms of their sales was February 9th, 1964. The Beatles appear on the Ed Sullivan Show, and this was really fun to track down. This is a very famous story, but it turns out there's a lot of different versions of the story. So here's where being a historian comes in and helping a little bit, perhaps, just getting. I don't know that the version matters because there's some commonalities in different versions of the story. But one version is that Ringo saw the wrap, that is what the drums are wrapped in, which is called oyster black pearl. He saw it in a music store in London, which was the Music City, London, owned by Ivor Arbiter, who's now a drum builder. And he said he wanted a set made with that wrap. And the guy told him, the salesperson told him, well, you can only get that on Ludwig's. And he said, okay. He said he wanted, according to Ludwig Jr., Ringo wanted our name on the front head so all his friends could see he was big enough to play a foreign name made in America. That's one version of the story. Another slightly different version from Bill Jr.'s autobiography is that the salesman had been instructed to push Ludwig's and had one of these sets in the window of Music City. So they all agree it was in Music City, London. They'd just gotten a franchise for all of England and Ireland, and he pointed out the Ludwig set in the window. Ringo fell in love with it. He bought the Ludwig set under the condition that the name remain on the head, which again was not a common thing, and actually it's bigger there than it was on Morello's set. Why, again? Because he said he wanted everyone to know that he had Ludwig drums. And again, this was a sign that you'd made it. Thanks to Rob Regenio for reminding me to mention the class issue. There's a class issue going on here. If you were working class and you could buy a Ludwig drum, you know you had really arrived. So it's that association with, you know, with cost and quality and everything else. Ringo's version, and I tried to practice my Ringo, but I just couldn't get it down, so I'm just going to read it. Ringo said, I was walking down the streets of London with Brian Epstein and some of the boys. I saw the kit in the window. It was black oyster pearl. It looked great. The dealer went to take off the decal that said Ludwig, and I said, leave it on. I just love everything American. So, you know, there's common themes here, and it's kind of interesting that there's so many different versions of the story. Later on, he wrote a little letter. When I was a little boy way back in Liverpool, I used to look into the music shops, and especially the shops that had drum kits, and the Ludwig was always my favorite. But of course, we were much too poor to be able to afford one, etc. So, but this was kind of in the context of an endorsement by then. So again, this is, you know, this is the problem of doing history in the context of business history, where you don't know, there's always an agenda, but sometimes these are a little bit more obvious. So by then he was fully on board with Ludwig's. So he liked the finish. It was the meaning to some degree of owning Ludwig's. But what did happen is not contested, and that is Ludwig Jr., Bill Jr. said that the Ed Sullivan Show was the show that launched 1,000 purchase orders. Almost the next day, very soon after, they added a second shift running from 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. 6 days a week to keep up with the orders for this kit wrapped in black oyster pearl. It was the, if you want a kit, it's the Ludwig Classic kit. It's a very specific model with a very specific setup and very specific sizes, and there's even a huge discussion over what the real Ringo kit was, and so on and so forth. And these drums wrapped in this, there's one on eBay right now. They're trying to get about $5,000 for it. Just a snare drum, that is. Jr. later recalled in his autobiography that for 3 years after the Ed Sullivan Show, the only holidays they shut down, that is, aside from Sunday, the only days they shut down were Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. And what everyone agrees on is that they went from sales of 6.1 million in 1964 to 13.1 million in 1966. So now they really were the most famous name on drums. So Ringo kind of helped bring that about. Another result is kind of becoming the victim of your own success. And what happens, as far as I can determine, because this is not in the Ludwig histories, by the way, is that this is the timing of the intense competition, not only from the other drums, American-made drums, but the Japanese drums begin to flood into the American market. It's kind of interesting, the timing, almost about the same time Japanese cars do. Pearl was already making drums since the 50s. The new drum companies of Tama and Yamaha came about after Ringo's appearance and began to come into the U.S. market. And that's why I say kind of victim, because now the competition is going to be incredible. Although people still kind of want the Ludwig same kit, but now it's just keeping up with the demand for drums, and Ludwig is really stretching to try to just keep up with drum set orders, with the whole phenomenon of everybody having a rock band and not really knowing how to play their instruments. But that's okay. This is another fellow who helped with the innovation, I guess you would say. One of the issues was they had made things for mostly for the jazz market, or pop market, and then when different styles of rock drumming come in, Ludwig actually invented this material, this hard plastic material that they came to call the Vista Light drum. And every drummer, even if you're really not into rock drumming, every drummer knows the John Bonham set, which is amber Vista Light. So he furthered that reputation of now he's associating fully with the kind of the whole rock music, and that was really Bill Ludwig's vision, as well as Dick Shorey, just kind of insisting that they had to go with the flow, you know. So these Vista Lights, they also bring. That's part of an ad. You can just see it better. The metal snare drum is a much louder drum than a wood drum. It's called the Supraphonic, and it's some accounts say it's the most played, most recorded drum in the world. because especially after Bonham used it, everybody wanted the Supraphonic. This is actually a version of that called the Super Sensitive, which is the absolute top of the line. Okay. And it's a Ludwig. Okay. So they introduced the Vista Light in 1972, and then they have the Triad. This is also about the time that they introduced total percussion. So they're now going to remind people they don't just make drums, they make everything. They acquire Musser and make marimba xylophones. They continue to make timpani, which they had pioneered really in. Everything you can imagine. So they're almost back to their beginnings in making all percussion, but they're reminding people they're not just a drum company anymore, which is kind of ironic. To quickly fill out the, let me fill out the chronology and then talk about the collecting aspect of it. In 1973, William F. Ludwig Sr. died, leaving Jr. running the company, and he was called the Chief, by the way, affectionately. In 1981, actually, they sold to Selmer. Selmer now owns Ludwig. And they moved the factory where it is now to Monroe, North Carolina for, I'm guessing, economic purposes in 84, 85. Bill Jr. chose to stay on as a consultant, and was actually highly valued in the, continued to be kind of the figurehead of the Ludwig arm of the Selmer company. Then eventually, surprise, surprise, some of the production is outsourced to Asia. And what I found, again, was kind of curious, because I haven't called Ludwig myself, and I don't know that I'd get a straight answer. Because I tried to do some research, and there's no agreement on where the accent line of Ludwig drums is made, except that it's not really completely made in the U.S. Some people say it's made in China, some people say it's made in Taiwan. One person on a forum called the company and asked where they were made, and they say, oh no, they're made in the USA, they're just assembled in Taiwan. And being made in Taiwan actually would be considered the better product, because at least, again, according to my research, there's stricter controls, quality control, and things like that. But most of their drums apparently are still made in Monroe. But they have a whole line of drums that they outsource. In 2008, the Chief died, Ludwig Jr. died, and it's curious that Walter Slingerland Jr. died in the same year. So you had two kind of icons of American drum making dying in 2008. Just a year before their 100th anniversary in 2009. Okay, I want to turn to this whole collecting phenomenon. It turns out there's collecting and there's collecting. Just like everything. I'm just using drums as an example in this case. And by the way, the background is the Champagne Sparkle, which is also a very 60s kind of rap. The former, that is, there's the collecting that's very highly regarded, particularly, again, on these forums online. That is, finding something, getting the find, finding something in an attic and knowing what it is. It's based on knowledge. It's based on research. It's based on knowing what you're seeing when you're seeing it, kind of thing. By the way, and of course, all the usual things in terms of talking about old stuff. That it's at least vintage, meaning 20 to 30 years old, which by now isn't that old. It's all original, the more original parts on it, if it's in at least good condition. Of course, rarity is a plus, but I found that wasn't always the case. Because it's weird how those Ringo sets, there were so many of them, yet they are kind of hard to find. That is, the people that have them aren't selling them, I guess, is what's going on. But they're very highly valued, even though there were just jillions of them. Association with an artist, and so on, and I'll get to that in a couple of minutes. But this is the Ludwig & Ludwig Gold Triumphal. This particular model was about 1925. It sold for $125. I couldn't get any kind of, it was gold. Every drum was engraved differently. There were only about 12 of them made in the 20s, and so they're very, very, nobody's selling. I couldn't get any kind of a price on anything because nobody's selling them. This one was actually owned by William S. Hart, the silent movie actor, and he gave it to his son, who I believe still, is still in the family. Then there's the other kind of collecting, which is kind of frowned on. I mean, not frowned on, but it's not considered to be real collecting. And that would be buying this drum. And I think there's a class issue a little bit here, too. It's true that you have to have some means to do any kind of collecting. But this is the kind of drum that's sold to people who have money to be it's kind of considered to be a kind of a dilettante-ish collecting. These drums were made, 50 of these drums were made, 24-karat gold-plated and engraved, and they're beautiful, beautiful drums. You would never want to play it. The average asking price is about $10,000. So again, and the people that buy them usually aren't considered serious collectors. They're things that are made to just have. It's conspicuous consumption more than a love for Ludwig drums. Although most people on the forums like me said they wouldn't turn one down if it was given to them. Hint, hint. Okay. So this brings me into the eBay thing. It's really interesting that probably everything has its so-called holy grail. And you see this phrase all the time in drum collecting. And it's actually not, the gold triumphal would be a holy grail if anybody could get their hands on one. The most often used that you can actually get your hands on is called the Black Beauty. And they were made in the 20s and 30s by Ludwig and Ludwig. This one has been relisted. They dropped the price $100, so it's still on eBay right now. You can go look it up for $23.99. Just so you know that some of these things actually sell, and that's a theme too. You can ask anything you want for something, and it's all about what somebody's willing to pay and what the market will. I think it's fair probably to try to get about $2,000 for these drums, and this one actually did sell. It's at this point I feel like Jay Leno, that thing he does with, did it sell or not sell on eBay? Okay, maybe you don't stay up that late, but okay. So this is another Black Beauty that actually sold. As far as drum sets are concerned, it's actually the Ludwig and Ludwig of the 1940s. There was 1 year that this set was made in 1941. There are only about 15 of these sets known to exist, or maybe ever existed. It's called the Top Hat and Cane wrap. This fellow Don Bennett in the state of Washington seems to be, he's a major dealer. So famous drummers, sell him their drums, or he acts as kind of their agent. So you'd go through Don Bennett if you had something incredibly valuable. He had this listed for about $50,000 on his site, and I believe he finally got about $40,000 for it. Again, because of the shortages, they started making these sets, and then they discontinued it almost immediately when the U.S. entered World War II. So anyway, there's different ways that value, again, is assessed. One is kind of by association with the famous, and this is called the Buddy Rich model. There's quite a few of these out there, actually. This one sold for $450. And he played a drum like this. This would bring a lot more money, obviously, if he actually played this particular drum. So there's the drums that the famous drummers helped to design or requested, and Buddy actually did have a hand in designing this particular drum. This was made for him, this model. And then there was the drums that people actually played. And this came up a while ago. This was one of Joe Morello's sets. And these days you have to have documentation to prove who played them, and this fellow claims to have it. And he didn't get it. This never sold, which is too bad. There's also various Gene Krupa sets that have come up for about that price. They were Slingerlands, though. So anyway, so there's genuine collecting, there's special edition collecting, and then there's what I call the low-end history professor salary collecting. So my own collection, small as it is. This is my set at home. And yes, as my partner says, you can see our crappy floor in our basement that needs repainting. But anyway, this is not a matching set. It's from the bass drum I got first from 1964, and I restored it, and then decided to piece together a set, hopefully from 1964. But so I got the tom on the far left from 1964. The mounted tom was actually really cheap. It was a 1964 tom, but these idiots had taken a sparkle wrapped drum and painted it black on top. It just kills me when I see that stuff. So I stripped it all down and found some wrap and restored it, essentially. I built the drum that matches the bass drum, actually. That's from 1966. But that's a marching drum that I converted into a tom-tom. And then I have a collection of snare drums. That's the set with cymbals. That's a 1960, what's called a transition badge era drum, which I use with my set. Then I kind of wanted something from every era, so this is a kind of a student model, but a fantastic sounding drum. It's called the Acro Light. It was an aluminum alloy drum from the Keystone Badge era. This is 1967. Then I have a 1976 Acro Light. Then I have a 1980s Maple Piccolo that I use in my studio. And then there's this one, which is a 1969 Super Sensitive, which I bought new, all by myself. I bought new when I was in high school, and I've had it ever since. This went to Washington with me. It's gone everywhere, college with me, everywhere. This kind of led me into drum building. These are two drums, and this represents two kinds of drum making. The one on the left I did kind of earlier on. Wit is the people that made the shell. It's a solid shell. It's a bent. It's not a ply shell. It's a solid piece of wood that's been bent into a shell. But basically, I think of it as kind of a kit because I bought all the parts separately. I decided what I wanted the drum to look like. I searched out the parts and I put it together. So the only skill there was really assembling the drum once I had all the parts together. This one I'm really, really proud of because that was more of kind of a from scratch because I took a marching shell, a Premier marching shell. I cut it down by hand, not power tools. I installed the lower reinforcement ring, et cetera, and that was really drilled all the holes. This was pre-drilled. I learned how to drill holes, and boy, that nerve-wracking, because boy, do they have to be exactly right. You can't be an eighth, a 16th of an inch off, or the rims won't fit. They won't line up with the lugs and everything. So anyway, it came out pretty well. But let's talk about why all this is really important. It's about playing the drum, right? So Bill said, "Are you going to play?" And I said, "Well, twist my arm." And then I said, "Well, no, don't do that." But anyway, yeah, sure. I thought I'd demonstrate what this drum sounds like. This would be a competition rudimental solo. It's what I kind of started out doing when I was younger. And for you drummers, every one of this fellow's solos has a list of the rudiments that are used, so you kind of can gauge if you're a teacher, can this student play these rudiments? And if they're really good at this particular rudiment, then you pick out the solo that anyway. So he's kindly listed those. So I'm going to play this for you. As I usually say, the best thing about drum solos is that most of them only last about a minute and a half. So bear with me here. I'm going to read it right in here. In filing music I can see. This is weird reading from here. I haven't tried this yet, though. run back and see. It was before they got their name back.
No, it's on the ad. It said, we've got our...
Oh, on the ad.
Yeah, right there.
Oh, that's a cow. That's cow skin. It's calf skin head. And that actually appeared on their drum heads to show that they were really calf skin.
Okay.
And being in Chicago with the slaughterhouses, they had a great connection there with